The music was loud, people were dancing, laughing, and taking selfies. It was supposed to be a fun night, until everything changed. In the middle of the crowd, Tobe's angry voice suddenly cut through the music. Everyone turned. Chimamanda stood frozen, her hand shaking as she tried to calm him down. But before she could speak, Tobe's hand landed across her face. The sound echoed louder than the music ever did. The room went dead silent. Glasses stopped midair. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "Did he just hit her?" Chimamanda didn't cry. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she stood still, her pride fighting against the pain. Tobe kept shouting, calling her names, saying she embarrassed him. Friends tried to step in, but the damage was already done. Not just to her face, but to her soul. She looked around and saw pity, shock, and judgment in their eyes. Slowly, she straightened her shoulders, wiped her tears, and whispered so only he could hear, "You'll remember this day, Tobe." And as she walked out of that room, barefoot and broken, everyone knew something powerful had just been born from her pain. All nerad die fra gelach. My thubs wish no were headlamps snow would have met veinem. Svettelar so dochnevi, cern was sensitive, stamp south. Says he free limb of sand carrish no Irish. Said that sir would have sweet. Flasser has derp so when a sir losher and earchish. All was if the wish geld the cat wine a manner who in snow whisters near shillop seeing on myself for that. Sluffish nick at self. All be as the nurryman in a shelf for a hawkish. They said at Sir Diamond at 0 slow in it up. Sir Neval the Bluff, Snicer them or help shit snow. Here would sit here a gold miss with Sir Nixima. Sir Elonash they're not look up, sis Archnima when the Enam Nurks that's this really drone them. So Elkernaz in this Nemad knitter Michel be. Scully sure we're right. Sash der has nimmer would sing it a ham smoker. Vanish der peckish. We stand the nester bishop. Here we're right der hama. Here come full of sour, Dalf than hurrying all of Messadish, Termer Methvino, her did have no, Terps with the slime red in your vac, look at near were snails gnawing your ilking in a wife of burger, Snamstash dromnish nester marsh miscus dishpetsir, so at Ashkeller will off serpse with, your ilgither through mamaza. Across the crowded hall, Amma's eyes met the bride's, Vanessa. For a moment, time froze. Vanessa stood there in her glittering white gown, surrounded by bridesmaids and flashing cameras. She looked like a queen, perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect life. But when her eyes landed on Amma, that smile faded. Her expression hardened into something cold, sharp, almost cruel. It was the kind of look that said, "You shouldn't be here." Amma's heart sank for a moment. Once, that same woman had been her closest friend. They'd shared food in the university dorms, whispered about their dreams under the stars, and promised to always support each other no matter what life brought. Vanessa had even been the one who introduced Amma to Kojo, the man now standing at the altar waiting for her. Back then, Kojo had been just a dreamer, a man with ideas and ambition, and Amma had believed in him more than anyone else. She helped him through sleepless nights, comforted him when his business almost failed, and gave him love when all he had was hope. But when success came, everything changed. Kojo started dressing differently, speaking differently, and treating Amma like a part of his past instead of his partner. Vanessa, who came from a wealthy family, became his new world, glitter, fame, and high society. Their friendship ended quietly, with unspoken betrayal between the lines. Now seeing Vanessa in her wedding gown, Amma felt a deep ache, not from jealousy, but from the realization of how easily people forget who helped them climb. Vanessa turned away quickly, pretending Amma wasn't even there. Her bridesmaids followed her lead, whispering and laughing behind their manicured hands. Amma took a deep breath and smiled softly. She refused to let their arrogance steal her peace. One day, she thought, they'll remember this face, not because I crashed their wedding, but because fate never forgets those it owes justice. As the music played softly in the background, Amma's mind drifted back to the days when love was simple, when it was just her and Kojo sitting under the old mango tree near her mother's house. They would talk for hours about their dreams, their future, and the kind of life they wanted to build together. Kojo used to hold her hands and say, "One day, Amma, we'll have our own company, our own house, and I'll make you the happiest woman alive." She believed him completely. He wasn't rich then, but he had big dreams, and Amma was ready to walk through every storm with him. She remembered those nights when he couldn't afford dinner, and she'd bring him food wrapped in newspaper. The nights she stayed up helping him write business proposals on her old laptop, encouraging him when investors rejected him. She believed in him more than he believed in himself. To her, love meant partnership, building together even from nothing. But when success finally came, everything began to change. Kojo stopped visiting as often. He started spending more time with people who wore suits and spoke with pride in their accents. He became distant, polite but cold. Then came the whispers from his family. "Amma isn't your level," they said. "She's too ordinary. You need someone who fits your new life." At first, Kojo defended her, or at least he tried to. But slowly the pressure won. He stopped answering her calls. Then one evening she saw a picture of him online, at a luxury event, standing beside Vanessa. The caption read, "Power couple goals." That was the night Amma cried until her pillow was soaked. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was betrayal. She hadn't lost a lover. She had lost her best friend, her dream, her belief that love was enough. Standing in that wedding hall now, she felt the echo of those memories. But this time there were no tears. Just calm strength and a quiet promise to herself. Never again will I love someone who forgets who I was when they had nothing. Months passed and Amma slowly rebuilt her life. She focused on her small business, kept to herself, and tried not to think about Kojo or Vanessa. Some nights she still wondered how everything changed so fast. How love turned into silence and friendship into distance. Just when she had started to heal, a golden envelope arrived at her doorstep. The paper shimmered under the sunlight, embossed with elegant letters. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Kojo Mensah and Vanessa Ofori." For a moment Amma just stared at it. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the names again. It felt like someone had poured salt into a wound she had carefully bandaged. Her first instinct was to tear the invitation apart, to throw it away and never speak of it again. But something stopped her. A quiet voice inside whispered, "Go." She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to cause a scene. She wanted peace, closure. She wanted to look at them one last time and let go of everything that once hurt her. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about walking into the very place that once rejected her, standing tall, and walking out with her dignity intact. That night, she sat on her bed holding the invitation, thinking about how life could be so ironic. The same man who once said he couldn't imagine a future without her was now inviting her to witness his new beginning, with someone else. It stung deeply, but Amma smiled through her tears. "Maybe this is how I finally close this chapter," she whispered. So when the wedding day came, she chose her late mother's Kent dress. Not flashy, but meaningful. She looked in the mirror one last time and said softly, "I'll go, not as the broken girl they left behind, but as the woman who survived." And with that, she picked up her bag and stepped out, ready to face the ghosts of her past with the strength of a woman who had already won in silence. When Amma arrived at the wedding reception, the celebration was already in full swing. Music filled the air, cameras flashed, and laughter echoed from every corner of the decorated hall. Tables were covered in white linen and gold plates, each seat marked with names of the important guests. But as Amma walked in, no one approached her. No one smiled or offered a place to sit. She stood quietly by the door for a few seconds, hoping someone would acknowledge her presence. No one did. The bridesmaids, dressed in sparkling gowns, passed by her as if she were invisible. They whispered to each other, their eyes filled with amusement. "She actually came?" one murmured. Another chuckled softly, pretending to fix her makeup. Even the waiters, busy serving champagne and plates of jollof rice, seemed to skip her corner. She lifted her hand once to ask for a drink, but the waiter simply turned away. For a moment, the humiliation stung like fire in her chest. But Amma didn't let it show. She took a quiet breath and found an empty chair in the far corner, near a window where no one else wanted to sit. From there, she could see the dance floor glittering with pride and money. She watched Vanessa laugh loudly, surrounded by friends who once used to borrow her notes in school, and now acted like they had never known her. Still, Amma smiled. Not out of joy but peace. She had learned that silence was more powerful than anger. Every rude glance and cold shoulder was a reminder of how shallow people could be. She didn't need their approval anymore. As she sat there, her heart calm but her mind sharp, Amma whispered to herself, "One day you'll remember this face, the girl you chose to look down on." She didn't know what was coming next, but deep inside, she felt it. The tables were about to turn. And when they did, everyone in that room would see the real meaning of grace and power. The ceremony began with music and laughter. The bride and groom stood at the altar, glowing under the soft golden lights. The priest smiled, flipping through his notes as the guests settled down. Everyone was waiting for the beautiful vows, the kisses, and the grand celebration that would follow. Amma sat quietly in her corner, her hands resting on her lap, trying to stay invisible. She didn't come to be noticed. She just wanted to sit through it and leave quietly. Then, just as the priest was about to continue, he paused and looked toward the crowd. His voice was calm but carried power. "Before we continue," he said, "we must take a moment to honor someone very important, the person who made all of this possible." The crowd grew quiet. Murmurs spread across the room. People exchanged confused looks. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, and Kojo shifted uncomfortably, unsure what the priest meant. "Can we please have Madame Amakusi come forward?" the priest added warmly. For a second no one moved. Then every head in the hall turned toward Amma. The room fell into complete silence, the kind that feels heavy and electric. The same people who had whispered and laughed at her earlier were now staring in disbelief. Even the bridesmaids froze, their fake smiles fading. Amma blinked, stunned. She wasn't expecting her name to be called. Slowly she stood up. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm. The sound of her heels echoed against the marble floor as she began to walk down the aisle. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of her dignity. She could feel their eyes on her, shock, confusion, maybe even fear. Vanessa's face turned pale, Kojo's jaw tightened, and the guests leaned forward to see what was happening. Amma didn't rush. She walked with grace, her kente dress shining softly under the lights. For the first time that evening, she wasn't the ignored girl in the corner. She was the center of attention. And though no one understood why yet, gasps rippled through the hall like a wave. For a few seconds, no one even breathed. Vanessa's eyes widened, her perfectly painted smile fading as confusion took over her face. Kojo stood stiff beside her, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't dare to look at Amma. The whispers began again, but this time, not with laughter or mockery. It was shock. "Did he say Amakusi?" someone murmured. "The same Amma who came in that simple dress?" another whispered, their voice filled with disbelief. Amma stood slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. She took a deep breath and began walking down the aisle. The entire room seemed to move in slow motion. Every step she took echoed through the hall like a heartbeat, calm, confident, unshaken. The woman they had ignored, the one they looked down on, now had every eye fixed on her. The murmurs faded into silence. Even the music stopped playing. As she walked past the rows of guests, some lowered their eyes in guilt while others watched in awe. The bridesmaids who had laughed at her earlier stood frozen, their hands clutching their bouquets tightly. Amma's face was calm, her chin lifted slightly. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone spoke louder than anything she could ever tell them. When she reached the front, Vanessa's eyes darted nervously between Amma and the priest. Kojo swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost from a past he had tried to bury. Amma paused beside the altar, her kente dress glowing beautifully under the golden lights. The priest smiled at her kindly, as if he knew the truth everyone else didn't. The air was thick with tension, curiosity, and something else, respect. The same people who once whispered that Amma didn't belong now couldn't look away from her. In that moment, she wasn't the girl from the past. She was a woman reborn, quiet, powerful, and unforgettable. And the silence in that grand hall told everyone one thing. The story had just ch. The priest looked around the silent hall, his voice calm but firm. "Before we continue," he said, "it's only right that we tell the truth. This beautiful wedding, this grand venue, and even the business empire that brought this couple here today, none of it would exist without one woman's kindness." Every head turned toward Amma. The priest smiled gently and continued, Madam Amakusi is the silent investor who saved Kojo's company when it was about to collapse. The entire hall erupted in gasps. People exchanged shocked glances, their mouths open in disbelief. Vanessa blinked rapidly, her face losing its color. Kojo's hand shook as he tried to keep his composure. The same guests who had whispered about Ama's simple dress were now staring at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Ama stood still, her eyes calm but shining with quiet strength. Memories flashed through her mind. The day Kojo came to her in tears, begging for help after his business almost went bankrupt. She had taken her life savings, every coin she owned, and handed it to him without hesitation. She believed in him, not for profit, but because she loved him and wanted to see him succeed. He promised to pay her back and to never forget her support. But when success came, he vanished, leaving her behind like a shadow from his old life. Now, as the truth poured out in front of everyone, Kojo couldn't even lift his head. His mother, who once called Ama unworthy, looked down in shame. The guests who ignored her now whispered apologies under their breath. Ama didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, graceful and composed, as if this moment wasn't about revenge but justice. The woman they mocked for being too ordinary was the reason their golden couple had anything to celebrate at all. And as Vanessa stared at her, speechless, Ama's calm expression said everything. You can wear my crown, but never forget who built the throne. The priest reached for a folder on the table beside him and carefully opened it. The sound of the papers rustling was the only thing breaking the heavy silence in the hall. Before we proceed with the vows, he said softly, there is one more formal step. He looked directly at Ama, his expression warm and respectful. Madam Amakusi, as the main shareholder and official partner of the groom's company, your signature is required for the legal completion of the business declaration tied to this marriage. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. People looked at one another in disbelief. Kojo's face went pale, his lips parting in shock. Vanessa blinked rapidly, trying to process what she just heard. The woman they had mocked, the one who sat alone in the corner, was not just a guest. She was a powerful business partner, the backbone of their empire. Ama stepped forward gracefully, her every movement calm and deliberate. The priest held out the document and a golden pen. Her hand was steady as she took it. For a moment, she looked down at the paper, her eyes landing on Kojo's name written beside hers, a painful reminder of the past they once shared. But instead of anger, a small, peaceful smile curved her lips. She signed her name with confidence, her pen gliding smoothly across the page. When she finished, she gently placed the pen down, straightened up and looked at Kojo. Their eyes met, his filled with regret, hers with quiet power. The guests watched in stunned silence. No words were needed. In that simple moment, Ama had done something extraordinary. She had just signed off on the very success that once left her behind, the same success that wouldn't even exist without her. As she turned and handed the papers back to the priest, she felt an incredible calm wash over her. She wasn't the broken woman he left behind anymore. She was the woman who could give and take away, and she chose grace. The same pen that once wrote her heartbreak had now written H. Vanessa stood frozen, her perfect smile trembling as reality hit her like a wave. The same woman she had mocked, pitied, and looked down on was the very person who had built the foundation of her new life. Her fingers gripped the edge of her bouquet so tightly that a few petals fell to the floor. The color drained from her face, and the sparkle in her eyes dimmed. The laughter, the confidence, the pride, all of it disappeared in seconds. She tried to force a smile, the kind she had practiced for photos, but it looked weak, nervous, and painfully fake. People around her began whispering, and she could feel their stares piercing through her designer gown. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't the center of admiration. She was the center of shame. Every compliment she had received that day now felt hollow. She realized the truth she had ignored for so long. All that glitter was never hers alone. Ama turned toward her slowly, her face calm and kind, but her eyes carried a depth that words couldn't explain. She didn't look angry. She looked powerful, the kind of power that doesn't shout, it simply exists. She stepped closer to Vanessa and spoke in a soft, steady voice. Never look down on anyone, not even yesterday's version of yourself. The words hit Vanessa harder than any insult could. Her lips quivered but no words came out. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to fix the mess of her pride, But there was nothing left to say. Amma wasn't the same girl who once waited for their friendship to matter. She had grown beyond that. In that moment, Vanessa saw herself clearly, not as the bride in white, but as a woman standing in front of the very person she underestimated. And deep inside, she knew she would never forget Amma's words. Because sometimes life doesn't shout its lessons, it delivers them quietly, through the people you once looked down on. Kojo stood there, his throat tight and his heart pounding painfully in his chest. He couldn't even look at Amma. Every time he tried, guilt burned through him like fire. The memories flooded back. The nights when Amma had stayed up helping him draft proposals, the evenings she cooked for him when he was broke, the way she believed in him even when he stopped believing in himself. She had been his biggest supporter, his peace in chaos, the one person who saw potential in him before anyone else did. And he had thrown all of that away. Now, as he stood beside Vanessa in his expensive suit, he felt smaller than ever. He saw the calmness in Amma's eyes, that quiet strength he once loved but took for granted. She looked like a woman who had walked through pain and turned it into power. She didn't need to shout or prove anything. Her presence alone said it all. Kojo's chest tightened with regret. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain why he had chosen differently. But the words wouldn't come. Deep down, he knew there was no excuse for the way he had treated her. He remembered how easily he had let his family's words influence him. Amma is too ordinary, they said. You need a woman who fits your status. He believed them. He thought success needed someone who looked rich, not someone who made him feel rich inside. But now, standing in front of her, he realized how wrong he had been. Amma didn't gloat or smile with pride. She just looked at him for a brief moment. A soft, emotionless glance that said, "I've forgiven you, but I'll never forget." That hurt him more than anger ever could. As the ceremony went on, Kojo barely heard a word. The applause, the music, the lights, everything faded. All he could see was Amma walking away from him again. This time not as the woman he left behind, but as the woman he could never reach again. And that realization broke him silently inside. The hall was still buzzing with shock, but slowly, the silence gave way to applause. It started as soft claps, hesitant and uncertain, then grew louder as people processed what had just happened. The same guests who had whispered about Amma's simple dress and laughed at her earlier were now clapping. Not out of celebration, but out of recognition. They were realizing that the quiet woman they had overlooked was the very reason the couple's life looked so perfect. Some guests approached her cautiously, their faces filled with embarrassment and guilt. "Amma, I'm sorry for what I said before," one woman whispered, her voice shaky. Another man, who had barely noticed her before, bowed his head and muttered, "I didn't know. I should have treated you better." Amma listened to every apology with calm patience. She could feel the sincerity in some, the awkwardness in others, but she didn't let it affect her peace. She smiled softly, not with pride, but with understanding. "It's okay," she said warmly, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had held her together through all the pain. "I needed this day too, not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right." Her words hung in the air, gentle but powerful. Everyone who had doubted her felt the weight of truth pressing down. They realized that she had never been ordinary. They saw that strength isn't always loud, that grace isn't always flashy, and that patience can hold more power than anger. As Amma walked through the crowd, some bowed slightly, others whispered words of admiration. She accepted the gestures politely, but she didn't linger. This was never about proving a point to them. It was about reclaiming herself, showing the world and herself that she had always been capable, always been strong, and always had her own worth. In that moment, she felt a quiet triumph. The applause wasn't just for her. It was a reminder that justice can arrive without shouting, that recognition can come even in silence, and that, when the ceremony ended, Amma stepped out of the grand hall, the heavy doors opening to the bright afternoon sun. The warmth of the sunlight kissed her face, making the colors of her Kent dress glow even more beautifully. Cameras flashed, capturing her every move, but she didn't need the pictures to know the impact she had made. People lined the streets, whispering, pointing, and staring in awe. The city that once watched her struggle, the city that had doubted her, was now watching her rise. She walked slowly, deliberately, with her chin lifted and her shoulders straight. Every step felt like a declaration, not of revenge, but of triumph. Power didn't need to shout. It didn't need to yell or demand attention. Sometimes, it walked quietly, wrapped in dignity, and Amma embodied that completely. She felt the weight of every past insult, every whisper, every cold glance melting away with each step. Drivers slowed down to watch her pass. Children peeked from behind their parents, sensing something extraordinary in her calm confidence. Even the photographers who had come for the wedding paused, realizing that the story unfolding before them was bigger than any event. This wasn't just a bride walking away from a hall. This was a woman reclaiming her life, her worth, and her power. As she reached her car, Amma glanced back at the hall one last time. She didn't feel anger or bitterness. She felt peace, pride, and a quiet joy that no one could take from her. This was her moment, not because she needed them to see it, but because she had survived, endured, and risen above it all. She slid into the car, the sun casting a golden glow over her face, and took a deep breath. The city that had once watched her suffer now watched her conquer. And in that calm, unshakable presence, Amma knew something important. True power isn't loud. True power walks slowly, carries itself with grace, and leaves a mark that no one forgets. Amma stood by her car, the golden sunlight falling softly across her face. She laughed quietly, a sound full of relief and peace, not pride or arrogance. It was a laugh that came from deep inside, from a place that had once been broken, ignored, and underestimated. "They ignored me at the wedding," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling just slightly. But when the priest asked for my signature, the whole room stood still. She remembered every face, the judgment, the whispers, the laughter at her simple dress. And now she saw it all differently. Those moments of pain had shaped her, taught her patience, and prepared her for this exact moment. Her tears from the past felt transformed, as if they had turned into gold, sparkling with strength and resilience. Her silence, which they had thought was weakness, had become her greatest victory. Amma took a deep breath, feeling the cool air brush against her skin. She looked at the city streets around her, at the people going about their day, unaware of the quiet storm of triumph she carried. She smiled softly, knowing that no one could ever take this feeling from her. She didn't need anyone's approval or admiration. She had proved it to herself, that she was strong, capable, and free. And as she slid into her car, ready to drive into her new life, Amma laughed again. This time louder, full of freedom and hope. The girl they ignored had risen, not with noise or anger, but with grace, courage, and the quiet power of victory. Her story was no longer theirs to define, it belonged entirely to her.